It's 1933. A fourth of all Americans have no way to make a living, and those that do are scratching their heads wondering how they're supposed to live on it. Banks closed, businesses busted, and stocks dwindled to 1/10 of their price as panic blossomed and the infrastructure of both rural and urban America wilted away. As you sit on your front porch pondering what to do about the dust devil coming towards your field of crops, you can't help but wonder how things got this way. Today, we'll be taking a look at the profound effects that electricity had on the Great Depression. While different government regulation from the Hoover administration may have saved or much more likely minimized this descent into darkness, the ball was already rolling, or rather the generators were already buzzing a decade before. The electrification of America, the decision to use electricity instead of fossil fuels, swept across the industrial areas of the eastern coast into the pockets of Texas, where steel mills, manufacturing plants, and oil drills dotted the skyline like modern-day billboards. Businesses pumped out products with the introduction of conveyor belts and literal non-stop production techniques. But this should be a good thing, right? It's the roaring 20s, not the recessive 20s, right? Well, while the Industrial East was basking in economic glory, the farmers of America, who would later be dubbed as the Forgotten Man by FDR, remained a largely agricultural domain, growing the typical tobacco, wheat, corn, and cotton, never even coming close to their eastern counterparts in both profit and opportunity. This schism in the American economy, this separation between sunburnt farmers and exhausted factory workers, is ultimately, in my opinion, one of the greatest causes, but not the catalyst, of the Great Depression. To show this divide, take a look at these two statistics. American Tobacco reported a 14% gain in electricity use per worker in 1929. Texas Corporation, an oil refining company, reported a 392% gain in electricity use per worker in 1929. Perhaps it isn't surprising that farming doesn't require much electricity to get their jobs done, except I'm lying. It most definitely does. Agriculture benefited from technological advancement in the same way that industries on the East Coast did. Farmers, especially in the time period right after the First World War, heavily overinvested in farmland due to shrinking crop prices, often going in debt just to afford the unfathomably bulky and expensive machines required for mass harvest. It's not that the demand for electricity wasn't there, but rather the supply wasn't. 50% of urban America lived with electricity in their home. Only 10% of rural America did. While wealthy businessmen arrived at well-furnished homes with extremely cheap food to put on their table and tell their family about how they missed the elevator, and middle-class workers replaced the 19th century tenement housing crawl spaces with apartment complexes, crippling debt and lack of electricity, combined with at this point years of falling prices and overworked land all the way from the days of World War I, made farmers' outlooks on life bleak at best. Okay, so that's background information, but what does this have to do with the stock market? To connect the two, I want to talk a little bit about the power of emotion. Not the sense of panic and fear that we commonly associate with the stock markets, at least yet, but the power of dread, hunger, hopelessness, and how the representatives of the 1929 Republican-leaning House, Senate, and White House used those emotions to their advantage. I should stress that this feeling of hopelessness isn't a joke within the slightest. Similar trends in both the 1920s and 80s show that when overproduction is rampant, prices fall, and farmers are left picking up pennies worth of profit from acres of work, or instead turn to suicide. Farmers needed an answer, and they needed one now. Keep in mind, this is before the crash. The Dow was at a record high. The introduction of the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, infamously known for promising quote-unquote prosperity for all, imposed sharp spikes in tariffs and elevated two key politicians into the limelight. Reed Smoot, a Republican senator from Utah who also happened to be the chairman of the Senate Financing Committee, and Willis Hawley, a Republican congressman from Oregon, who, surprise, surprise, was the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee in the House. But the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act wasn't either of their ideas. That responsibility goes to Joseph R. Grundy, a man who would be elected into the U.S. Senate during the first year of the Great Depression, but at this time was the president of Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. See, Grundy had a few political friends, and chose to spend his off days making quid pro quo favors for politicians, including the election of Hoover in the 1928 RNC in Kansas City. Here in Kansas City was the birth of the Smoot-Hawley tariff. Grundy, deep in the manufacturing industry, saw the problems with overproduction that farmers had been facing for years, and hoped his business wouldn't see the same. Grundy proposed that an increase in tariffs would lower price points and allow for the oversaturated market to catch up with itself. Keep in mind, this worked before, only 6 years prior, with the Ford-McCumber Tariff Act, and when they tried that time, foreign investment in the U.S. market went up. So why did this blanket legislation not cover us this time? The major discrepancy between these two bills is in its legislature. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act had one fatal flaw. It was, well, empty. Those at the RNC knew this and decided to throw out a fishnet of a bill, emphasizing an importance on agriculture and limited, quote, upward tariff revision. The tariff wasn't an act, it was an idea, or rather a blank check to its legislators. The truth was unveiled in the Ways and Means Committee under Willis Hawley, where the bill radically changed to target manufacturing, with many delegates from Grundy's home state of Pennsylvania pushing to raise chemicals, cement, and textiles. But it doesn't stop there. The bill called for flat raises on tariffs, not percentage ones. As the economy got worse, the tariff remained unchanged, multiplying its effect on price points dramatically. The fissure in our rural and urban economies was steadily increasing, but now there was a reason for political disillusionment as well. This disillusionment, even if only felt strongly by the Democrat-favoring farmers, created a chasm that would only be filled by polarization. In essence, this unrest made everyone double down on their choices. As farmers in the West wrestled with political friends of industrialists in the East, economists like Irving Fisher across both coasts warned of the economic tidal wave that would result. But as we all know, politicians didn't listen. The world outside of America had reacted as well. Just over a year after the introduction of the bill and a cumulative 23 notices of retaliatory tariff threats with 0 responses from President Hoover later, France, for one, said enough was enough and created a united front against the United States, with the intention of cutting them off from the world trade and finding markets outside of the U.S., influencing Britain to do the same. Canada, U.S.'s biggest export market, raised retaliatory tariffs, choosing to trade with both France and Britain instead. The Senate Finance Committee under Reed Smoot reacted 10 days later, suspending the hearing of the bill in Senate. 4 days after suspension, the Senate announced a huge revision of the bill with farmers in mind. Remember that disillusionment and its effects on political parties? Well, this comes back in the form of 13 Republican senators storming in stating that they would do whatever they could to stop the new, fair, and the sense of honest bill from passing. From August to October of 1929, no progress was made. That date seems familiar. Elmer Thomas of Oklahoma introduced a potential solution to break the stalemate, stating that the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act would only affect agriculture. On October 21st, the amendment to the bill was crushed 64-10. Funnily enough, the panicking part of this story doesn't start on October 21st, but rather the next day, where Congress lowered tariffs on tannic acid, a medicine commonly used during and after World War I as a remedy for burns and poisons. This movement had seemingly sealed the fate of the American people, as Congress, after fighting for months to decide on which tariffs to raise, chose instead to lower them. Black Thursday followed 48 hours later, where the market dropped 11%, signaling the biggest loss ever recorded in American history. To make matters worse, on October 27, 1929, amid a wild, panic-filled market, Senator David E. Reed gave a speech on the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, predicting it'd die in the Senate. On October 29, 1929, the stock market crashed, losing 12% of its value in a single day and breaking the previous record set not even a week before. Now, there's many more economic reasons for the crash than just farmers not making their money, including the rapid printing of federal notes and obscene bank loans that people would turn around and throw right back into the stock market. But ultimately, the economic reasons for these aren't the only ones that matter. Emotional ones do too. Bernard C. Boudreau explores this idea, showing that from a random sampling of large American companies spread between agriculture, oil, and manufacturing, electricity usage had a direct correlation between stock sensitivity to both good and bad news on the tariff. Coming from personal experience, news makes or breaks companies. With media only becoming more saturated, I fear that the embellishment of news or hasty political action exchanged over Twitter with our largest trade partner might lean our country in a slightly wrong direction. The stock market is simply put untamable, but it does have rules. As the market fluctuates, so do our expectations, and as our expectations fluctuate, so does the market. Keep in mind, anomalies occur and prediction is only so strong, but it isn't hard to draw parallels between the workers of today's world and the farmers of the past. It also isn't hard to draw parallels between our government then and now. As our current world shifts towards more aggressive language and negotiation, I only have one message. Let's use history to our advantage this time.